Meg Records, the Meg Record Keeping Institute. Person of interest, George McCarson. Content warning. This page contains multiple mentions of gore and torture. If you find these subjects uncomfortable, please skip this page. Name, George McCarson. Affiliations, the BNTG. Aliases, the Pickpocket. Last seen, level 5.1. Image caption, Meg sketch of George McCarson. Description, George McCarson is an approximately 45-year-old male of European descent and a master of deception and violence. George has short, fine brown hair and hazel eyes, with gray stubble above and below the lips. He stands at 6'5" and has last been seen wearing a navy blue sports coat with a white button-down shirt and khaki pants. George is described to have an extroverted and confident disposition, displaying himself as cocky and vain. Despite his personality, he is very talented in the art of stealth and trickery, commonly known as the pickpocket among close friends and strangers alike. George McCarson is the leader of the BNTG and also rules the mysterious group dubbed the McCarsons, with little to no information regarding it. Due to the group being newly discovered, details are unclear on what this group's main focus is, but the current belief is that this group functions as a crime group, selling entities and human corpses and organs, as well as functioning as an active hitman service. As for his BNTG presence, George is the primary manager of Object 85, a natural drug found on level 194. And, as aforementioned, completely in control of the entire business. During George's past in the front rooms, he was a notorious member of the Sicilian Mafia, carrying out orders on a daily basis, as well as a big-time gambler with incredible luck. He supposedly lived somewhere in Italy, where he had been arrested multiple times for numerous small crimes such as smuggling, shoplifting, and illegal drug usage, but was never caught for his more large-scale crimes, ranging from homicide and battery to organ trafficking. He was most known for his black market deals and fully operational business, specializing in hitman services until he entered the Backrooms and the illegal operation fell apart. Witness account. This section has frequent mentions of blood and torture. Please skip this section if you are uncomfortable with these topics. Hi. My name is Allison Conley, BNTG associate working with Natural Resources. I am here to give my account of the most recent interaction with George McCarson. I'll begin. It was probably around 4:30 in the afternoon, and Robert and I were inside his office on level 11. I've been in the BNTG for 2 months now, and as Robert is a higher-up, he was discussing with me some basic elements of the establishment. I mean, most of the conversation was normal. That is, until his phone rang. Of course, it was George. Robert and I glanced at each other before picking up. He put it on speakerphone so I could hear as well. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he wasn't okay. As soon as the call connected, he began asking where Robert had put his Object 85 stores, but he wasn't letting us speak. When Robert finally spoke, he started explaining how George had been scamming customers and using the drug improperly. To be honest, George almost always had an agrugua smoothie in his hand, and it almost seemed he lost his grasp on reality sometimes. At this point, George just went berserk. He was screaming about how he was making them rich, and Robert was tearing down the business. I heard that in the front rooms, George wasn't a great guy either, always being selfish and manipulative of other people who were close to him. Anyways, Robert tried explaining his reasoning for destroying George's agrugua stores. It went on between the two for a few minutes, but eventually George cracked. I don't know why he would do this. The drugs, combined with his bloodlust, got to his head, and he simply left the call and said, "You've messed up for the last time." I can't explain it any more than that. After the call, though, Robert got super paranoid and started getting really nervous. We didn't really do anything after that, just waited for what would happen next. George is wild and unpredictable, but undeniably uncanny, and that's what scared us the most. I guess now I just have to cover the thing. It was probably 5:20 p.m. at that point, a sudden knocking on the door. I don't like to curse, but it scared the shit out of us both. Of course, we weren't going to open it, though. We'd have been crazy. And then the lock fidgeted a little bit, and then went quiet. A second later, the door slid open. I guess George broke the lock. We had heard a loud smash right before it opened. Well, in walked George, still with his thin, uncombed hair and ratty suit. George looks like your average salesman at first glance. Well dressed, confident expression, all of the things. But George is anything but a nice salesman. He had his revolver by his side. In his other hand, he had a singular bullet. I had been told by others that he had a gun on him when he entered the back rooms. I don't know why he had one, but he did, I guess. Back on topic, he loaded the gun silently. Neither Robert nor I had moved an inch. We didn't know what he would do. Well, he ended up aiming the gun straight at Robert's forehead, all while carrying this maniacal, even excited expression. He wiped the sweat off of his brow, and I vividly remember him saying to Robert, "No one, no one argues with me. No one argues with me. You hear that, bitch? Any words you want to say, bud?" Robert didn't respond. I was so petrified I couldn't move or speak to tell him, "Run." When Robert expertly ducked under his desk and grabbed his pocket knife, though, I knew someone was dying in that room. Robert lunged at George, tackling him to the ground. Maybe he was giving George one last chance to be good, but I knew it wasn't happening. George reached for a glass bottle on the table next to him and smashed it into Robert's chest. Blood flew from the wound, dotting the victim and his assailant in crimson. Robert then drew his knife, slashing it across George's leg. Which one? I'm not sure of. More blood flew, as the twins wrestled on the floor. I began to scream. I couldn't move, but the noise that came out of my mouth would surely attract attention. I shut my eyes and heard the screams and grunts. It sounded as if the world was on mute, and only the two men in front of me could break the silence. I slowly opened my eyes, horrified to see Robert pinned against the table, his knife in George's hand. He violently tore open Robert's stomach, laughing the same hoarse, high-pitched wheeze he always did. I watched in pure terror as George played with his revolver in his fingers, staring at the still-breathing Robert. As he beat Robert's face with his knuckles, he noticed the box of agrugua lying in the corner. Caught up in his rage, he rushed over to the crate and brought it to the desk on which Robert was lying. I'm pretty sure he said something like, "So, did you hide these here all along? Tell me, how do they taste?" Before grabbing two of the fruits and shoving them into his mouth, nearly tearing his cheek muscles from the strain. Image caption: the stairs of Robert's residence after George fled. I was terrified, mortified. I had never seen a man capable of such torture and laugh it off. I wanted to run as far away as possible, but that's when George finally acknowledged me. He momentarily tore his gaze off Robert and focused on me. In an instant, a glass bottle was sent hurling towards my face, shattering on impact. Then another, and then the juicy squirt of agrugua juice coating my face as a fruit collided with my nose. I was helpless and pathetic, watching as a glad, bloodied mess beat a man that had done no wrong. Fortunately, it seemed that George had grown bored of the agony his twin brother was experiencing. He drew his revolver once again, tossing and catching the bullet in the air. A gun is a powerful thing in the back rooms, able to save your life when you need it, but it has to be used well, used in self-defense. I saw George drop the bullet into the revolver quietly and place the weapon under Robert's chin. Instead of firing, George spun the barrel, placing the bullet somewhere else in the weapon. I stared from the corner as he pulled the trigger, but nothing came out. He then spun the barrel again and pulled the trigger, but no avail. He did it once more, still nothing. I couldn't take it. I was losing consciousness from the blood loss, and I would pass out any second. As my eyes closed, I heard the gunshot that killed Robert McCarson, as loud as a steam whistle and as quiet as the breeze. Before my consciousness slipped away to a quieter place, I heard George's taunts and jeers echo through the room, bullying the lifeless form that had been having a normal day just an hour ago. Then I blacked out. Whereabouts? Shortly after the murder of Robert McCarson, George was spotted making multiple sketchy trade deals within smaller groups, trading items such as human and entity limbs and organs. The purpose of this was not well understood until just very recently when a new group of interest known as the McCarsons was discovered. While much is unknown about this group, it has been observed that this group is very dangerous and behaves in a very violent and gruesome manner. Upon further research into the McCarsons, it has been discovered that George McCarson is seemingly the leader in control of this group. Days after learning of George's allegiance to the McCarsons, physical disformities had been reported after interactions with George. Multiple large tumors, up to 3 inches wide, have appeared on George's legs, as well as small appendages resembling those of an infant protruding from George's skin. There has been one minuscule arm located under his hair, about the size of an adult index finger, for no apparent reason, as well as one other infantile arm and a fully functional eyeball and eyelid pair that have been seen on George. The second miniature limb is located approximately 2 inches above his waist, and the third eye is on the back of his head. While the eye may function properly, it is covered in a thin layer of skin, practically obscuring its vision. How or why these abnormalities exist is unclear, but it is suspected to do with the 6-inch scar running along his back. At the moment, George McCarson's whereabouts are unknown, but it is assumed he currently resides on level 5.1. It has also been speculated that while being a criminal at large, George remains loyal to the BNTG, still carrying out duties as staff and also seemingly replacing Robert McCarson's role as head of natural goods. He manages Aguruga sales alongside other unlisted BNTG items, such as Object 74, and has subsequently been the indirect cause of multiple casualties. Interview. Meg member Dan Kent was sent to record an interview with George McCarson on 8/17/2022 on level 5.1 using a hidden camera on his shirt pocket. Due to the graphic nature of the footage, a description of the events and dialogue has been logged below. Please take caution when reading as it contains descriptions of blood and gore that may be uncomfortable to some viewers. The footage begins in the middle of a bustling crowd inside of level 5.1. There are flashing lights and buzzers from the machines, as well as the constant chatter of the crowd. Dan shuffles through the crowd, searching for George McCarson. There are suddenly shouts of surprise and panic among the crowd. Dan rushes forward, and George McCarson comes into view. There is a pool of blood forming next to the stage, where George had seemingly stabbed another wanderer in the right shoulder after losing a game of blackjack. George then proceeds to snuff out his cigarette on the wanderer's back before noticing Dan approach. George lets out a hoarse, high-pitched wheeze. "Well, hey there, buddy. You got business with me, or have you just come to bask in the greatness of yours truly?" Dan: "Actually, yes. I was wondering if I may interview you. You've been an idol of mine since I heard of you, and I'm very glad to have finally met you." George: "Well, I ain't busy at the moment." "Sure, but let's do it over a few drinks, eh?" The two men begin walking to the bar area of the casino as Dan begins the interview. Dan: "I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Dan Kent. I'm just going to ask you a few questions so that I can get to know you better. First question. Could you explain to me more about this McCarson's family you're in charge of?" George: "Oh, that. I guess you could call it a hobby of mine. I don't want to let you in on too much, though. Essentially, I'm the leader of that little group known as the McCarsons. We do trades, you could say, as well as some surgical improvements. Why are you asking?" Dan: "No reason in particular, sir. I've just been curious." George and Dan order their drinks at the bar. As they receive their drinks, George begins to speak. George: "How about we switch topics, eh? I do like talking about myself, but let's focus on you. Tell me, what is the real reason you came to talk with me? I'm not so popular that you can idolize me. A murderer, a businessman, and a master of trickery." Dan: "Well, I was kind of hoping to join the McCarsons. You guys sound like a pretty cool group." George: He finished his drink and drew his steak knife from his pocket. "All right then, Mr. Dan. Well, there's an entry fee to joining us. If you would allow me to quickly draw some blood, you must enter. Seems fair, right?" Dan. Oh, I'll pass. I guess I'm not cut out to join you. I I guess I'll see you around. Have a nice evening. George. Slow down there, buddo. Now that I've spilled some info to you, I can't let you lose. Sorry. Adio, amigo mio. George sweeps Dan's legs with his own and pins his shoulders to the floor. The camera goes flying across the floor, landing in such a way that Dan's body is visible. Dan attempts to escape but is unable to, as George has pinned Dan's arms behind his back. George stabs the knife into Dan's left arm and proceeds to block off Dan's windpipe with his elbow. As Dan flails in the futile attempt to escape, George repeatedly pounds Dan's stomach with his fist, knocking the breath out of him. About 30 seconds later, Dan goes limp. George recovers the knife from Dan's arm while simultaneously noticing the camera. George approaches the camera and abruptly crushes it with his boot, ending the camera feed. About 36 hours after the camera feed was lost, Meg operatives retrieved Dan's corpse on level 5.1. After the events that took place on 8/17/2022, it has been recommended that all attempts to contact George be ceased. If any wanderers are to come into contact with George McCarson or any other alleged members of the McCarson family, please report your experience to a member of the Meg as soon as possible.